The museum on Nexus Prime was the largest building in the known galaxy. Every species that joined the Galactic Council sent their oldest and most precious items here. It was a place of pride, a place where civilizations showed off their history and their achievements. Ambassador Zeltrix stood in front of a glass case and felt her 4 eye stalks go stiff with shock. She was a Veronian, a species of purple-skinned beings with tentacles instead of legs. Her people had been part of the Galactic Council for 3,000 years. They considered themselves old and wise, but the thing in the glass case made her feel very, very young. It was a sword. A simple blade made of iron with a handle wrapped in old leather. By galactic standards, it was crude and primitive. Any first-year metalworker could make something better. But the date on the scanner made no sense at all. "Run the scan again," Zeltrix said to her assistant. Counselor Mevrak was a tall, insect-like being from the Crix Collective. He had already run the scan 3 times. Each time, the result was the same. "The weapon is 4,200 standard galactic cycles old," Mevrak said. His voice was flat, but his antennae were shaking. "This is not an error, Ambassador. I have checked the equipment myself." Zeltrix felt dizzy. The Galactic Council had been founded 6,000 cycles ago. That was considered the beginning of true civilization in this part of space. Before that, species fought and died in endless wars. The founding of the Council brought peace and order. This sword was made 2,000 years before that peace began, and it belonged to the humans. The humans were new. They had joined the Council only 30 cycles ago, which was nothing. A blink. Most species did not even learn their names for the first 100 cycles. Humans were considered children, barely out of their caves, lucky to have stumbled into faster than light travel before destroying themselves. Zeltrix had expected their museum contribution to be something small. A chemical gun from their recent wars, perhaps. Or maybe a simple bomb. Something that would make the older species smile and nod, and think about how far the little humans still had to go. Instead, she was looking at a weapon older than civilization itself. Across the exhibition hall, a young human woman was talking to a group of Thesari diplomats. The Thesari were gentle creatures covered in pale fur. They had achieved enlightenment through 10,000 years of peaceful meditation. They had never known war. The human woman's name was Katie Marsh. She had brown hair tied back in a simple tail and a smile that never seemed to leave her face. She was pointing at the sword and explaining its history as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "We call this a Jian," Katie said. Her translator device turned her words into perfect galactic common. "It's a Chinese design, about 2,500 years old by our calendar. Pretty standard for the time period, honestly. Every noble family had a few of these lying around." One of the Thesari raised a trembling paw. His name was High Seeker Vorus, and he was one of the most respected philosophers in the galaxy. Right now, he looked like he might faint. "You say this weapon is standard?" Vorus asked. "For its time, yeah," Katie said with a shrug. This particular sword belonged to a military commander during what we call the Warring States period. 7 different kingdoms fighting each other for about 200 years. It was pretty brutal. Millions of people died. The Thesari made a sound of pure distress. "Millions?" Vorus whispered. "Your kind killed millions of each other?" Katie tilted her head like she did not understand the question. "Well, yes. That's what war is. People die. It's awful, but that's how it was back then." Zeltrix moved closer, unable to stop herself. She had to hear more. She had to understand. "Human Katie Marsh," she said, using the formal address. "You speak of these deaths as if they were normal, expected. How can this be?" Katie turned to look at her. For a moment, something flickered in the human's eyes. something old and tired. But then the smile came back. Ambassador, with all respect, the Warring States period wasn't even that bad by human standards. Our Second World War killed about 70 million people in just 6 years. And that was less than a century before we met your people. The room went silent. Every alien in the exhibition hall was staring at Katie now. 70 million. The number hung in the air like poison. Zeltrix's tentacles went weak. She had to grip the display case to keep from falling. That is more than the entire population of the Veronian homeworld, she said. I know, Katie said. Her voice was gentle now, like she was talking to a scared child. We know how it sounds. Believe me, we know. But we're still here. We survived all of it, and we're still here. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small tablet. With a few taps, she brought up images on the display case's screen. This is the sword's original owner, she said. The image showed an old painting of a man in armor, stern-faced and proud. His name is lost to history now, but we know he served the state of Zhao. He probably killed dozens of men with this blade. Maybe hundreds. She swiped to another image. This one showed a modern human woman, old and smiling, standing in front of a wall covered in framed photographs. This is my great-aunt Martha, Katie said. She's 94 years old. She has a sword almost exactly like this one hanging on her wall. She got it for her graduation from military academy about 70 years ago. Vorla's made a choking sound. A graduation gift? You give weapons as graduation gifts? Sometimes, Katie said. It's a tradition. The sword reminds you of your duty, your responsibility, the weight of what you might have to do someday. She looked at the ancient blade in the display case, and her smile finally faded. We don't celebrate violence, High Seeker. We remember it. Every sword, every weapon, every scar on our history. We remember all of it. Because the moment we forget is the moment we repeat our worst mistakes. Zeltrix stared at the human woman. She was so young by galactic standards. Her entire species was young. And yet, looking into Katie's eyes, Zeltrix saw something ancient. Something that had seen too much and survived anyway. Your people frighten me, Zeltrix admitted. Katie nodded slowly. We frighten ourselves sometimes. But fear isn't always bad, Ambassador. Fear keeps you careful. Fear keeps you humble. And fear, more than anything else, keeps you alive. She turned back to the sword. That blade has been around for 4,000 years. It's seen empires rise and fall. It's watched my people tear each other apart and put ourselves back together over and over again. And now it's here, in a museum, surrounded by beings who have never known war like we have. Katie placed her hand flat against the glass. I think that's beautiful. I think that's the whole point. The sword isn't here to scare you. It's here to show you what we survived. And if we can survive all that, maybe there's hope for everyone. The emergency meeting was called before the museum's first day had even ended. Representatives from all 47 member species gathered in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime. Some came in person. Others appeared as holographic projections that flickered and glowed in the dim light. High, Arbiter Venlix floated at the center of the chamber. Venlix was a Melodari, a being made entirely of living energy. The Melodari had no bodies, no faces, no form that other species could easily understand. They had guided the Galactic Council since its founding, serving as judges and advisors. They were considered the wisest beings in known space. Right now, Venlix was pulsing with an uneasy blue light. We are gathered to discuss the human contribution to the Grand Museum, Venlix announced. Its voice echoed through the hall, translated instantly into every language present. Specifically, we must address the concerns raised by their historical artifacts. A Varonian delegate stood immediately. Her name was Counselor Dreth, and she was known for her sharp tongue and suspicious nature. The humans have presented weapons older than our entire civilization, Dreth said. Weapons designed for the sole purpose of killing their own kind. How can we possibly trust a species with such a violent history? They are dangerous. They should never have been admitted to the council. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Kricks clicked their mandibles nervously. The Dazari huddled together in their soft fur robes. Even the Melodari seemed to dim slightly. From the human delegation's platform, a calm voice cut through the noise. With respect, we would like to respond to these concerns directly. The speaker was a human male named Danny Cole. He was Earth's primary ambassador to the Galactic Council, a position he had held for 15 years. He was not tall or impressive by human standards. His hair was going gray, and his face had the lines of someone who had spent too many nights awake with worry. But his eyes were steady and clear. Permission to approach the central platform? Danny asked. Venlix hesitated. Allowing a representative to speak from the center was a sign of great respect. It was usually reserved for senior members, species that had proven themselves over thousands of years. The humans had been members for less than a single generation, but something in Danny's voice made Venlix reconsider. Perhaps it was the lack of fear. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence of someone who had faced worse than a room full of angry aliens. Permission granted, Venlix said. Danny walked slowly to the center of the chamber. His footsteps were the only sound. When he reached the speaking platform, he set down a small tablet and looked up at the assembled delegates. I understand your fear, he began. Truly I do. When humanity first made contact with galactic civilization, we were terrified of what you would think of us. We looked at your histories and saw clean, orderly progress, peaceful development, enlightened evolution. And then we looked at our own history and we felt ashamed. He paused, letting those words settle. The Varonians achieved space travel after only 3 major wars in their entire existence. The Kricks never had a war at all because their hive mind made large-scale conflict impossible. The Dazari meditated their way to wisdom over 10,000 years of quiet contemplation. Your paths to the stars were gentle. Ours was not. Danny tapped his tablet, and a holographic display appeared above him. It showed a timeline of human history stretching back 50,000 years. Red marks covered almost every inch of it. This is us, Danny said. Every red mark is a major conflict. Every dark spot is a time when we came close to extinction. Disease, famine, war. We built weapons that could destroy our entire planet, and we pointed them at each other for decades. We burned our forests, poisoned our oceans, and nearly made ourselves extinct through sheer stupidity. He looked at the timeline with an expression that was hard to read. And yet, here we are, still alive, still trying, still hoping. Counselor Dreth rose again. That is precisely the problem, Ambassador. You have proven that your species is capable of unimaginable violence. What guarantee do we have that you will not turn that violence against us? Danny nodded as if he had expected the question. None, he said simply. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. None at all, Danny continued, raising his voice to be heard. I cannot promise you that humanity will never be violent again. I cannot promise that we have moved beyond our darker nature. Because the truth is, we haven't. We carry our capacity for destruction with us always, like a shadow we can never escape. He let the noise die down before speaking again. But here's what I can tell you. We know what we are. We know what we're capable of. And that knowledge is our greatest weapon against ourselves. Danny pulled up a new image on his tablet. It showed a simple stone monument covered in names. This is a war memorial on my home continent. It lists the names of soldiers who died in just one of our many wars. There are monuments like this all over Earth. Millions of names. Millions of lives lost. We built these monuments not to celebrate war, but to remember it. To make sure we never forget the cost. His voice grew stronger. Every human child learns about our wars. We teach them about the death and suffering, the mistakes and the horrors. We do this not because we're proud of it, but because we know that forgetting is the first step toward repeating. Our museums are full of weapons like that ancient sword, not because we love violence, but because we refuse to pretend it never happened. Danny looked directly at Counselor Dreth. You ask how you can trust us. I ask you this. Would you rather trust a species that pretends it has no darkness, or a species that looks its darkness in the eye every single day and chooses to be better anyway? The chamber was silent. That sword in the museum is 4,000 years old. It was made during one of the bloodiest periods in human history, but it was also made during a time of incredible progress. The same era that produced that weapon also produced some of our greatest philosophers, artists, and thinkers. War and wisdom, destruction and creation, darkness and light. That's humanity. That's who we are. Danny picked up his tablet and tucked it away. We're not asking you to stop being afraid of us. We're afraid of ourselves sometimes. But we're asking you to see the whole picture. Yes, we're violent. But we're also kind, creative, stubborn, and impossibly hopeful. We've been knocked down more times than any species should survive, and every time, we got back up. He turned to leave the platform, then stopped. Oh, and that sword? The one that scared you so much? A friend of mine saw it yesterday. She's a history teacher. You know what she said? Danny smiled for the first time. She said her great-aunt has one just like it. Got it for her graduation 40 years ago. It's hanging on the wall right next to her grandchildren's drawings. He walked back to the human delegation's platform. That's who we are. Terrifying and ordinary. Ancient and new. Violent and gentle. All of it, all at once, all the time. Take it or leave it. The chamber remained silent long after he sat down. After the council meeting ended, Katie Marsh found herself surrounded by aliens. They came from every corner of the Great Hall, their strange bodies pressing close, their translator devices humming with questions. Word of Ambassador Cole's speech had spread quickly, and now everyone wanted to know more about the strange creatures from Earth. Katie did not mind. She had been preparing for this moment her whole career. A young Crix researcher pushed to the front of the crowd. His shell was still soft in places, showing his youth. His antennae twitched with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Human Katie Marsh, he said, using the formal address. Is it true that your species created weapons capable of destroying your entire planet? Yes, Katie said. We call them nuclear weapons. We invented them about 80 years before we made first contact with the galaxy. We actually used them twice in a war against each other. The Crix made a clicking sound of distress. You used weapons of such power against your own kind? 2 cities, Katie confirmed. Gone in seconds. Hundreds of thousands of people dead. It was the only time we've used them in war, and we've spent every moment since then trying to make sure it never happens again. But you kept the weapons, the Crix said. You still have them. Some of us do, yes. It's complicated. There was a period we call the Cold War, where 2 major human powers had enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on Earth many times over. They pointed these weapons at each other for about 40 years. How did your species survive such a time? Katie laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and genuine, and it seemed to confuse every alien watching. Honestly, we mostly tried not to think about it. Humans are very good at ignoring terrible things when we have to. We went to work, raised our children, watched entertainment, fell in love, had arguments about silly things. And sometimes, late at night, we would remember that the world could end at any moment. Then we would take a deep breath and keep going. That is insane, the crick said. Completely, Katie agreed. But it worked. The Cold War ended. We didn't destroy ourselves. And now here I am, talking to an alien in a museum on another planet. I call that a win. Ambassador Zeltrix had been listening from nearby. She moved closer now, her tentacles carrying her with careful grace. Human Katie Marsh, I must ask you something that has been troubling me since I first saw your artifacts. Ask away, Katie said. Your species has been fighting itself for longer than our civilization has existed. Your weapons have grown more and more deadly over time. And yet, when you speak of this history, you do not seem ashamed. You seem almost proud. How can this be? Katie considered the question carefully. Around her, dozens of aliens leaned in, waiting for her answer. It's not that we're proud of the violence, she said slowly. No one celebrates the death and destruction. But we are proud of what we learned from it. She pointed toward the display case where the ancient sword rested. That blade was forged during one of the bloodiest periods in Chinese history. Millions of people died during the Warring States era. It was brutal and cruel and terrible. But it was also a time of incredible thinking. Some of our greatest philosophers lived during that period. They watched the violence around them, and they asked hard questions. What makes a good leader? How should people treat each other? Is war ever truly necessary? Katie's voice grew more thoughtful. Every major step forward in human history has come from suffering. We invented medicine because disease was killing us. We developed farming because we could not find enough food. We created the technology that lets me talk to you right now because we needed faster ways to communicate during wars. We took our worst experiences and used them to build something better. You adapt, Zeltrix said slowly. We adapt, Katie confirmed. We take the terrible things that happen to us, and we find ways to grow from them. That's not pride in violence. That's pride in survival. Pride in resilience. Pride in the fact that no matter how many times we get knocked down, we always get back up. She paused, and her expression changed. Something softer came into her eyes. My grandmother was a survivor of what we call the Holocaust. It was a deliberate attempt to wipe out her entire people. Millions were killed in camps designed for nothing but death. She lost everyone. Her parents, her brothers and sisters, her aunts and uncles, her cousins. She was the only one who made it out alive. The aliens fell silent. Even those who did not fully understand human emotions could sense the weight of Katie's words. She lived to be 93 years old, Katie continued. She married, had 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. Every year, on the day she was freed from the camps, she would gather the whole family together and tell us stories. Katie smiled at the memory. She never talked about the horrors. Instead, she told us about the small kindnesses. The stranger who shared their last piece of bread with her. The guard who looked away when he was supposed to punish her. The friend who hid her family for a week, knowing it could mean death. She remembered every act of goodness, every moment of light in all that darkness. Katie wiped her eyes. She had not realized she was crying. She never forgot what happened to her. How could she? But she refused to let it be the end of her story. She chose to focus on what came after. The life she built. The family she raised. The love she gave and received. That's humanity. We remember our pain, but we don't let it stop us. We use it as fuel to keep going. High Seeker Vorlis had pushed through the crowd to listen. The Dazari philosopher's pale fur was damp with what Katie realized were tears of his own. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable being, Vorlis said softly. She was, Katie said. And so was her grandmother before her, and her grandmother before that. Every human carries stories like this. Every family has members who survive things that should have killed them. We are all descendants of survivors. That's the only reason any of us are here. She looked around at the aliens surrounding her. I know we scare you. I know our history seems like madness. But I want you to understand something. Every act of violence in our past was answered by an act of healing. Every war was followed by rebuilding. Every destruction led to creation. We are not defined by our worst moments. We are defined by what we do next. Katie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a locket, old and worn, with a faded photograph inside. This belonged to my grandmother. It's the only picture she had of her family before the Holocaust. She kept it with her every day of her life. When she died, she gave it to me. She held it up for the aliens to see. This is my history. Violence and loss and unimaginable pain. But also love and memory, and the stubborn refusal to give up. This little locket survived everything my grandmother survived. And now it's here, in a museum on another planet, being shown to beings from across the galaxy. Katie put the locket away. If that's not proof that hope wins in the end, I don't know what is. 3 days after the council meeting, a special visitor arrived at the museum. Her name was Lily Jiang, and she was 91 years old. She had traveled all the way from Earth just to see the ancient sword. The museum staff treated her like a queen. They cleared an entire section of the building for her visit. They provided floating chairs for her comfort and assigned their most senior guide to walk beside her. But Lily waved away most of the attention. She was a stubborn woman who had been taking care of herself for nearly a century, and she was not about to stop now. I can walk just fine, she told the worried staff. My legs still work. It's my knees that complain, and I've been ignoring them for 30 years. Katie had come with her, acting as both translator and support. She stayed close as Lily made her way slowly through the exhibition hall, past displays of alien artifacts and ancient treasures. When they finally reached the case containing the Jian, Lily stopped. She stood very still for a long moment, looking at the blade with eyes that had seen more history than most beings in the galaxy could imagine. My grandfather had a sword like this, she said softly. Her voice was thin with age, but still clear. A family treasure, passed down through many generations. He sold it during the war to feed his children. She pressed one wrinkled hand against the glass. He always regretted losing it. Not because it was valuable, but because of what it meant. It was a link to our ancestors, a reminder of where we came from. Katie explained to the nearby aliens who Lily was. Mrs. Jiang was a history professor for 40 years. She specialized in ancient Chinese weapons and warfare. She's forgotten more about swords like this than most experts will ever learn. I haven't forgotten anything, Lily said sharply. My memory is perfect. It's just my body that's falling apart. She studied the sword with the careful eye of someone who had spent a lifetime looking at such things. This blade was made in the state of Zhao, she said. Probably around 300 BCE, though the exact date is hard to know. You can tell by the ridge pattern along the blade and the way the handle was attached. The Zhao were famous for their horses and their metalwork. This would have been a nobleman's weapon. See how long the grip is. Made for someone with big hands. A warrior. A leader. High Seeker Vorlas had stayed close since the exhibition opened. He seemed unable to leave the human displays, drawn back again and again by some feeling he could not name. Now he approached Lily with deep respect. Honored elder, he said, using the formal title his people gave to those who carried wisdom. May I ask you a question? Lily turned her sharp gaze on the Vasari. Despite her age, her eyes were bright and alert. You may ask, she said. Whether I answer depends on the question. When your ambassador spoke to the council, he mentioned that humans give swords as graduation gifts. The idea troubled many of us. We could not understand how a weapon, a thing designed for killing, could be given to celebrate achievement. "Can you explain this to us?" Lily was quiet for a moment. She looked at the ancient blade, then back at Vorlis. "In my culture," she said slowly, "a sword was never just a weapon. It was a symbol, a responsibility. When a young person received such a blade, they were accepting a duty to protect their family, their community, their nation. The sword reminded them that protection sometimes requires sacrifice. Sometimes it requires violence, but it must always require thought." She turned to face Vorlis fully. "My grandson graduated from university last year. He studied conflict resolution and peace. At his graduation party, his great-uncle gave him our family's ceremonial dao. A different kind of sword, but the same tradition. It hangs on his wall now, next to his diploma and his photographs. But he studies peace," Vorlis said, clearly confused. "Why would someone who studies peace need a weapon?" Lily smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind a teacher gives to a student who's asking the right questions. The sword is there to remind him why peace matters. It is there to remind him what humans can do when peace fails. Every time he looks at that blade, he thinks about the responsibility he has chosen. To prevent conflict, to build understanding, to make sure that sword is never needed." She tapped the glass gently with one finger. "This Jian killed people. I am certain of that. A sword this old, carried by a military commander, it saw battle many times. But it also protected people. It defended homes and guarded families. The blood it spilled is remembered, but so is the purpose behind it." Lily looked around at the aliens watching her. And now here it is, in a museum on another world, surrounded by beings who have never known war like we have. The sword is not a threat anymore. It has become a teacher. Ambassador Zeltrix had been listening from a distance. Now she moved closer, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. A teacher of what, exactly? Lily's expression was hard to read. There was sadness in it, but also something stronger. Pride, perhaps. Or hope, of what we were, she said. Of what we are trying not to be. And of what we might become if we ever forget where we came from. She lowered herself slowly onto one of the floating chairs the staff had provided. Her knees had finally won their long argument with her stubbornness. "I am 91 years old," Lily said. "I have seen my share of violence. My father fought in a war that killed millions. My mother survived occupation by a foreign army. I grew up hearing stories of suffering and loss that would break your hearts if I told them." She looked at the sword again. "But I also grew up hearing stories of courage, of kindness, of people who risked everything to help strangers. Humans are capable of terrible things, yes, but we are also capable of wonderful things. Every act of cruelty in our history has been answered by acts of compassion. Every destroyer has been followed by builders. Every ending has led to a new beginning." Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a jade pendant, green and smooth and very old. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. She lived through the fall of the last dynasty, 2 wars, and a revolution that changed everything. When she died, she passed this to her daughter, who passed it to my mother, who passed it to me. One day, I will pass it to my granddaughter." She held up the pendant. "This jade has been in my family for over 200 years. It has seen emperors fall and nations rise. It has been hidden from soldiers and carried across oceans. It survived because my ancestors survived, because they refused to give up, no matter how bad things got." Lily put the pendant away. "That sword in the display case is the same. It is proof that we endure. No matter what happens to us, No matter how many times we are knocked down, we keep going. We keep hoping. We keep building. She looked at Vorlis with those sharp old eyes. You want to know what that sword teaches? It teaches that time passes. It teaches that empires rise and fall. It teaches that violence ends eventually. And it teaches that some things, the truly important things, survive everything. Lily smiled. That is the lesson of the sword. That is the lesson of humanity. We survive. We remember. And we never, ever stop hoping for something better. 6 months passed after the museum exhibition opened. In that time, the Galactic Council formed a special committee to study human integration. They met every week to discuss reports, review data, and ask endless questions about the strange creatures from Earth. The initial fear had not completely disappeared, but something else had grown alongside it. A grudging, confused respect. Ambassador Danny Cole sat before the committee for what felt like the 100th time. He answered their questions with the patience of a man who had learned that change takes time. What the council must understand, he explained, is that humans do not celebrate our violent past. We study it carefully, obsessively, specifically because we are terrified of repeating it. Every major conflict in our history is examined and analyzed and taught to our children. We want them to recognize the warning signs. We want them to see the danger coming before it's too late. High Arbiter Venlix floated at the head of the committee table, its energy form flickering with thought. Your species believes that remembering violence is the key to preventing it, Venlix said. It was not a question. More than that, Danny replied. We believe that pretending violence doesn't exist is the most dangerous thing we can do. Every human carries the capacity for terrible things. We know this because our history proves it every day. But we also carry the capacity for incredible goodness, for compassion and creativity and cooperation. Our challenge has always been to grow the good parts while keeping the bad parts under control. A Varonian delegate leaned forward. Her name was Councillor Thren, and she had replaced the hostile Councillor Dreth after the first month of meetings. Have you succeeded in this challenge? Thren asked. Her tone was curious, not accusatory. Danny laughed. It was a short, honest sound. No, not completely. We're still working on it. We'll probably always be working on it. But we've made progress. Real progress. The same species that built weapons capable of ending all life on our planet also created the art, music, literature, and philosophy that make life worth living. We're full of contradictions. We've made peace with that. He stood and walked to the center of the chamber, just as he had done 6 months ago. I want you to understand something about humanity. That sword in the museum, the one that started all of this, is not just an artifact of our violent past. It is proof that we survived. Danny's voice grew stronger. For more than 4,000 years, that blade has existed. Think about what that means. Empires rose and fell around it. Wars were fought, won, lost, and forgotten. Entire civilizations appeared and vanished. And through all of it, humans kept the sword, preserved it, remembered what it meant. He looked at each committee member in turn. We didn't hide from our history. We didn't pretend we were better than we are. We looked at the worst things we'd ever done, and we said, never again. And then, when we did those things again, because we did, we always did, we said it again. Never again. And we meant it every time, even knowing we might fail. Danny paused. That's not weakness. That's not some primitive inability to evolve beyond violence. That's the hardest kind of strength there is. The strength to keep trying, keep hoping, keep building, even when you know how easily it can all fall apart. The committee was silent. Finally, High Seeker Vorlis spoke. The Dazari philosopher had become something of an unofficial human expert over the past 6 months. Your species is terrifying, Ambassador Cole. Danny smiled. I know. And yet, I think I am beginning to understand why you have survived so long. You do not deny your darkness. You carry it with you always. And in doing so, you remain aware of it, watchful, ready. That's part of it, Danny agreed. But there's another part too. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. It was a folding knife, plain and well-worn. The handle was made of some kind of bone, yellowed with age. This was my father's, Danny said. And his father's before him. And his father's before that. It goes back 4 generations in my family. It's not really a weapon, just a tool. But it carries the same weight as that ancient sword in the museum. He held the knife up to the light. My great-grandfather used this knife to escape from a prisoner of war camp. He was captured during a terrible conflict, held for years in conditions I don't want it to describe. He used this blade to cut his way through a fence one night and start the long walk home. Danny turned the knife in his hands. My grandfather used it to build the house where my father grew up. He carved the door frames with it, cut the rope that hung the swings in the backyard. It became a tool of creation instead of survival. His voice softened. My father used it to carve wooden toys for me when I was small. I still have some of them. A horse, a boat, a little person with arms that move. He made them with this knife, sitting on the porch in the evenings, while my mother read books and my sister played in the yard. Danny tucked the knife away. And someday, when I'm gone, this knife will go to my daughter. She'll find her own use for it. Maybe she'll carve toys for her children. Maybe she'll use it to open packages or cut flowers from her garden. Whatever she does with it, it will carry our family story with it. He looked at the committee. That's humanity. We take the tools of survival and we pass them down, along with the stories of how they were used. The violence and the love, the war and the peace, the destruction and the creation. All of it together, because you can't understand one without knowing the other. The committee session ended shortly after that. No formal conclusions were reached, but everyone present felt that something had changed. The humans were still strange and violent and confusing, but they were no longer simply feared. They were beginning to be understood. In the months that followed, more humans came to Nexus Prime. Scientists and artists, teachers and students, diplomats and tourists. They wandered through the museum and showed the aliens their favorite exhibits. They told stories about their families and their histories. They shared meals and music and laughter. And every day, visitors from across the galaxy came to see the ancient sword. They stood before the display case and tried to understand what it meant. A weapon older than their civilization, preserved for thousands of years, carried across the stars by the strange creatures who had made it. Some left with more questions than answers. The sword was a puzzle they could not solve, a mystery they could not unravel. But others, the ones who stayed longest, who read every piece of information and listened to every human guide, left with something else. They left with hope. Because if humanity could survive everything they had done to themselves, all the wars and the suffering and the near destructions, and still reach for the stars, still dream of peace, still believe in something better, then maybe the future was not as fragile as everyone feared. Maybe the universe was bigger than any single tragedy. Maybe hope was stronger than violence. Maybe the sword was not a warning ad. All. Maybe it was a promise that no matter how dark things got, no matter how many times the light seemed to go out, someone would always survive to carry it forward. The humans had proven that. For 4,000 years and more, they had proven it again and again. And now they were here, among the stars, ready to prove it once more. The sword waited in its case, ancient and patient. It had seen so much already. It was ready to see what came next.